Yeah, so you were saying something about sacred spaces.
No, so you had just said, right, now that you were saying that you have trouble with the notion of the places being made sacred.
No, I have the I have a problem with the notion of sacredness.
That was what you were saying.
Like because the
Okay.
idea of holy is like reverence mixed with I will never get here kind of a thing. But like with spaces, I'm just like I'm already here, like I'm not a pollutant in anything.
Okay, what about different types of that though, right? I do feel when there is a cultural expectation of a certain thing that you can find yourself following into that practice more easily than you might in it. Like if you ever been to the Lotus Temple in Delhi, have you been?
Yeah, it's a really nice.
Yeah, and you might find yourself in a more meditative and of like contemplative like mind space because that's just like what's happening. The architecture is kind of
Thing
inviting you to
I
the
think that
like
like I don't feel reverence. I feel
okay,
wonder
but if you keep the
and I feel curiosity, but then that's not a specifically. Can I find spaces amazing, cool, awesome, interesting, inspiring? Sure. Sacred, not really. And I know sacred is different from those feelings that I described.
yeah, I think it's people's behavior that makes something feel sacred or not. Right? Like, I'll give you an example. When we were in Naoshima in Japan, there was this artist installation that was, I think I've told you about it, but not on the podcast. But it was very cool, right? Because the material was made with this hydrophobic, there we are, hydrophobic material. And then it was also designed in a way that periodically water would come up from these, I guess, drains, you would say, that were through the floor, but then the water would run around the floor. And it was kind of like a cave shape that was open to the elements. This cave could maybe have 300 people in it, but it had a capacity of maybe they would only let like 10 people in at a time. And you didn't always know where the water was coming up because of the way the floor was. You couldn't quite tell the hole. So I think everyone had a moment where they by mistake like stepped in a puddle or a puddle just like appeared next to them because it was running around. So it was just like such a cool space. And eventually like people would just kind of sit down and you would just kind of like watch the water play around. And it was this really interesting thing. In a way that I have not seen a lot of art exhibits, it really made people stop, right? Like, I think uniformly every single person found something to stop on and just
Hmm.
be there. And it's so rare, I feel, that you can kind of like find those things, whether it is, a painting or an installation that can really just connect with a lot of people and connect with them in a way that really feels meaningful, right? Fine. But I don't think there was any element of reverence to that, right? Like, people are like, this is a cool thing and we're here to experience this cool
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. That's how I would generally experience these kind of
Whereas I think
spaces.
there's a different thing where like I went 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when I was in Colorado. I was taking a workshop with Anne Waldman, who is one of the founders of Naropa. She's a Beat Generation poet, was there like with Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac. And what we did on the last day is we went on a trip to a cemetery where at this point in her life, she's 80, I think maybe even 81 years old. So like a lot of her friends are buried in this cemetery. And I think there's a certain way that she would approach the graves and that she would tell us the stories of them, that there was reverence, right? Actually, the person whose book I just used to raise the height of my mic, Anselm, but we went and visited his grave, and his wife had made the kind of what do we use, a mausoleum tombstone,
Hmm.
right? Like, right, and it had like this bench, and the bench was supported by these books and these authors that had been really pivotal in his life. Like, she'd had those carved, right? And then there was like these, like a lot of his work had this, I think it was a crow or maybe it was a raven, and so she had that like put as like as the kind of headstone marker. And right, there was this kind of sense of reverence in the way that Anne was telling us about this and telling us about, the way that his wife like accepted his, I think he had maybe had a, I don't know, I don't want to to misconstrue the details, but like just like
Yeah.
there was a reverence towards how she spoke both about her friend and then both about how she felt about the tribute that had been made by his family for him. And it gives you, I don't know, for me, it gives me these kinds of feelings of, which is more than awe when I
Yeah.
see people in that place.
Yeah.
You know,
It's a
I think
different dimension.
yeah. And for me, I can feel some of that even from their feeling of it, if you will. So then I can see where devotional spaces come from because I see it in the way people behave in them.
Correct. And I think this is where like our lines of you being okay with religiosity and me not being okay with it comes. I'm very okay with like not knowing that feeling or not having like an empathetic mirror to that. Like you
Huh.
can feel feelings that other people are feeling just because you have mirror neurons, they're gonna activate. And I'm just very okay with not letting them activate or like, not indulging that.
Interesting. Because I felt similarly about like organized religion, but I think now that I've found more things outside of that, yeah, like I saw this show actually last week when my mom was here called Redwood, which was Idina Menzel's like triumphant return to stage. If I'm not
Hmm.
mistaken, she originated one of the characters in Wicked, and she has this
Yeah.
incredible voice, right? And the story of Redwood was the story of someone who has gone through like an incredible personal tragedy, and
Hmm.
she finds religion of the big trees, right? Of the redwoods of California, those like the giant redwoods that are like 2,000 years old more. And she goes up and she spends a night in them. And there's a whole like kind of beautiful story of how she feels the nature in the tree talks to her.
Hmm.
But it's just it's interesting, and I mean I was a bit heavy handed, and like there were all these things, but I do feel like I see that more and more. It felt more and more topical, right? Where people are finding this sense of like connection and fulfillment in things that are not strictly spirit that formerly considered spiritual. Like I have friends who are dancers with me, right, and who find that in Kathak, and I think that's less of a stretch in some ways because I think Kathak has always been spiritual for some people. But I think these ideas of finding it in nature or in kind of like just spaces that are not very far away from organized religion. I feel like this is like a really lovely way for the world to be going. And it brings me.
Yeah. Like, happy for them. No, I mean, like, very honestly, I would say it's good when people find meaning wherever they find meaning, right? Like, it's not a bad feeling to have, just like it is in the family of awe and wonder. So it's a great feeling to have, right? But I also just feel very okay without it. So I don't know, like, it is one of those things where, like, you're not gonna paint with all the colors, and that's fine.
I do think that at the heart of storytelling is kind of this notion of helping people find fulfillment. And I think this is something that I have come from, early in our podcast and relationship. I think, I've talked to you about how I feel this way. That I think one of the like kind of like driving things for me in doing this kind of work and in building this company is this notion that we can help people find more fulfillment, right? Like there is this ability to both to help brands tell their story in a way that people can connect with them on more levels, and then also to help people tell their stories in the way that, right, like they're able to share the kind of different facets of themselves. And so I don't know, I'm interested in that.
I would 100% say that like I really chase fulfillment a lot in my life, and that's why a lot of my life is like centered around creativity and wonder and awe
But do
and
you
care.
give people that opportunity with you to
But
find fulfillment in you?
yeah, I think so. In
What
almost
does
all of
that
my
mean?
relationships.
No, I mean in your art.
So like where we dropped off last time was this idea that like maybe it is a telling problem rather than a story problem, both with what I'm doing with my art and with what is happening with the podcast. That like maybe we do have a story, but we are not just able to tell it well. And maybe I do have art that has a story, but like I'm not telling it well.
Yeah. I think in my mind, telling was definitely part of it, but I was also kind of focusing on how, right? Like, I think
Okay.
that we've been thinking a lot about the what,
Hmm.
but thinking about the how of what we're doing, which is the telling, right? It's like, how are you taking it to your audience? How are you getting it to that place? How are you communicating what you're trying to communicate? Let me say it that way.
Okay. So like maybe double click on that a little. Like in either context is fine. But like what does that mean?
Well, I'll give you an example. So,
Hmm.
one of the things we were talking about last week was this notion of like, how are you taking your story to the places that that community is already having as a gathering
Hmm.
whole? I think I said it, right? And I think today or a few days ago, I was reading the newsletter of one of my classmates from my MFA, Cody. And Cody has, I think 21,000 or maybe 27,000, somewhere in the 20,000 subscribers to their newsletter. And the newsletter is a lot about thinking about our patterns, right? Thinking about why it is that we do the things we do.
Hmm.
And how do you break down those patterns? And how do you just understand when you are falling into a pattern? As I was looking at this, I was like, this is the community that in a lot of ways I think would be interested in something like our podcast, where we do kind of spend time thinking about how we think about things, how we break down patterns. What are those patterns? Sure, there may be more business aligned, which maybe not all of those people on Cody's newsletter would be interested in. But then I was looking at like, it's like $75 to place a classified in the newsletter. It's like, do we spend more than that amount in like building our podcast? 100%. So is it
Yeah.
worth it for us to try and see, are there some places where we could put these things, like
Hmm.
maybe even spend some money to get ourselves in front of that community?
Hmm.
So that's the kind of thing I mean, where I think we can choose certain hows, right? Where we're like, oh, we're promoting this through these social networks, and I think depending on how you carve the how, right? How you decide what is the kind of like, are you choosing based on what mediums you're engaging with? Are you choosing based on like how much effort you're putting into it? Depending on how you do that, there's going to be some stuff that's going to feel more difficult. And I think sometimes if you carve the problem differently, you're able to now see that these things that you maybe thought were more difficult are not as difficult as you thought. Or maybe these things that are just thinking about the problem in a way where you're not like as focused on maybe like how am I using Facebook to my advantage or something, and it's more thinking about, well, what is Facebook doing? Like it's a gathering place for a community.
Hmm.
Well, what other things are gathering places for those communities?
But then one needs to define what is going to be the connecting thread for this thing as well, right? So, like, let's say if I was thinking about myself as an artist, right? I don't know how to define why would somebody be interested in what I am making. Like, are they here because of, even if you were to ask me like five reasons, I could make a list, but it would feel very cognitive as a list and not a particularly emotional list, if that makes sense.
Okay. Um, let's do a little experiment. So, as you know, I have this good friend Dylan,
Hmm.
who is a painter.
Yeah.
Um,
But see, the thing is,
Dylan,
Dylan is a painter.
yeah.
The more you are multidisciplinary, the more diverse your practice is, the harder it becomes.
Mm,
Like, I'm not saying
you
that it
anticipated
is,
what I was going to do.
yeah, like, I don't think it is the problem that I want to be an artist and that is the issue. The problem is that, like, my practice is too broad. Like, the answer to what do I do requires 15 minutes to properly explain. Like, I met your dad last weekend, right? And I was like, I mentioned something about going for the shoot, and then I was like, oh, wait, I'm not sure if you know. Like, I am a VFX producer. And then he was like, I don't know what all you do. So, everything feels right. You must be doing that. And like, it was funny, but it is also true. Like, a lot of people who know me don't know. And it is true for you as well. Like, every new facet is, I don't know. I feel like most storytelling or messaging requires you to almost like create a projection of the multifaceted gem that the person or the thing is and project it on a 2D space. And it's like, okay, here is one projection, and here is another projection, and here is another projection. But it's like, but what if one did not want to compress that?
Mm.
Do you get what I'm trying to say?
I guess that does make sense, but I would just wonder, like, what happens if your projection is not complete? Right, and this was the story I was telling a little bit about, like, the videos I've been shooting of the dancing of like a rehearsal for our Kathak show and whatnot. Whereas, like, yeah, sometimes you can have these really tight crops of like just the gungurus, and you're implying the rest of the story.
But that is because the underlying story is story of Kathak. And Kathak is a dance form, and there is all of those things. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know what is the through
Hmm.
line for me.
And I would say that when I'm making a video to share with a certain community, then I would send a certain kind of video, right? It's like if I'm watching a clip from Eurovision, my expectations of what that is really different than if I'm just like watching a compilation of like great singing, you know? So depending on what audience is that's for, you're going to cut the clip differently. You're trying to emphasize what a great singer someone was on Eurovision. You're going to cut the clip differently than if you're trying to show the highlights of Eurovision.
So, who is the audience apart from, let's say, Cody's audience? Who's the audience for who's the audience for our uh, podcast?
Well, I think there's a set of people who are interested in self help. And I think a lot of them tend to be entrepreneurs, or at least there's an intersection between like self help and entrepreneurs. And I do think that that is the place where we most live.
Hmm.
I don't know. I think like Cody has an audience that's like a lot of small business owners. It's people who might be like really small influencers, or maybe they make like a craft, or they make different things that are, I don't know, like small businesses where you would have maybe one employee or you're doing it yourself. And now, is that the right audience for us? Maybe. Like, that's very different than I think the entrepreneurs we have met, because we both come from a more tech space where people are more building products for other people and they're building teams along with building those products. I think it still could be the right space.
Would
There's a
you
lot of
say
small business owners in America and in every country.
would you say that like there is also this factor of maybe Cody is interacting with the like mindset side of those small business owners, but we go on the business side of more those small like I'm just trying to think about. So let's say there is, if I just think about each individual person is
Hmm,
multifaceted, right?
hmm,
Like not just us, but like everybody else is also super multifaceted. So like you could be interfacing with their business side, or the fact that they are a creator, or the fact that they are interested in XYZ, or the fact that they face XYZ problems. Like how specific does the community get in this case?
So let me show you something. So
Hmm.
like this is the newsletter I was reading in here. Maybe I should shrink it a little bit. I think it's fine. Oh, I think it's fine, right? You can.
Hmm.
And I think what Cody's talking about here, I can shrink it a little bit, is that a challenge that they overcame, right? And it was being an alcoholic and kind of reaching sobriety. And and then it's talking what they're talking about here is like how it feels to have this celebration in a time when the world is so
Yeah.
like screwed up, you know? And then how like how it feels like when you can't celebrate, even when you like when you feel it's so important to celebrate, that celebrate this is something that right, that they really want to do to fuel our fight against fascism, but could not do it on this day. Right. And then what is the context? Right. I was coming from this, like really coming out of this experience. I felt like I should be able to do it. I felt like I've grown so much, but still I can't. I still feel hopeless, right? Like, and now where are they going with that? Well, guess what? It's okay to be hopeless, right? And there is like a place, and that sometimes that's just where you are. And so I feel like in this story, there is just so much. And then here's some information about like how we can go deeper and like what some things are happening and then some classifieds. And so what I feel happens here when you do something like this is that you're creating a space, you're telling a story that lets people connect with that story. Like you're telling a story that lets someone see themselves and see their problems and see, sure, I haven't had that exact experience, but I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to want to do something and to have committed
But
to yourself and that this
that
is
is
important.
generic.
But it's done in a way that's not generic, right? It's done in a way that feels very real.
But then that's not a marketing problem and that's not a community problem. That is the product building problem. Like the things that you highlighted are about Cody's message and their writing, not about who are the people that they are reaching. And maybe there is something that I don't understand here. But like based on what you just said, I would think about the questions would be how are we presenting the information in our podcast, not who are we reaching.
Well, to me, those go hand in hand, right? Like how we present, how we tell the story is influenced by who we're telling the story to. But I really agree, right? Like this is where I started from. I think the issue is how we're telling the story, not so much what the story is. And I don't know if you're combining those two in your how.
No, but like, how can. But I thought that you were saying that it's about who we are telling the story to. Like, where are we finding those people? Are we going to the places where they gather? Which is not as much about the like structure of the message.
It is and it isn't, right? Because depending on who you're telling that story to, right, the structure of the message is going to be different. At an extreme example, right, like my professor was teaching both us this last semester, and she teaches a class in the women's prison. And I'm certain the way that she presents that material would be different depending on the context, because just the people are in such different contexts.
Yeah, but like if you have, that's a little bit like, our workshops can be very structured. We can cater to things and to people. But if you're thinking about like a larger thing, like whether it is podcast, which is more generic, and you try and find the people, or whether it is like me as a whole, like I wouldn't have a singular audience, right?
No, but a facet of you might have a singular audience, right? Like, do the people who, how do I say, who's a good multidisciplinary artist, like people who write Pharrell's music may not like what he is making at Louis Vuitton, right? And in fact, like, there's not necessarily an overlap between those two. It doesn't make him less of an incredible, like, what he, it seems, I was just at the Met Gala show, so I saw, and a lot of that was like Pharrell because like Louis Vuitton has a big part, LVMH has a big part of that gala. And so, yeah, right? Like, people were talking about how, like, yeah, it's so rare that someone like an artist like that can make a jump to becoming the creative director of like such a storied fashion house and then just like be celebrated in it, right? Like, be taking it somewhere. But I don't think that means that people who like his music necessarily are going to be into high fashion, or like into that type of work. And even if they
No,
are,
but
they
I
may just
feel
have a
like
different aesthetic for that than.
But I feel like we are just defining the problem more and more broadly, which results in not solving it, right?
I'm saying that I think you have to solve it for the different facets differently. There is an audience for the comics you make, and there is an audience for, I'm trying to think of other things you make. I don't know, the games you make, but those are not necessarily the same audience, and those communities are not in the same place. And I think what you're trying to say to me, which I'm pushing back on, is that you're trying to find a story that unifies them. And I'm saying I think it's time for multiple stories.
I mean, there have always been multiple stories, which means that, like, 10 people like this thing, and 15 people like the other thing, and 5 people like the other thing. There have always been multiple stories. There have always been multiple platforms. There is no singular way of understanding what I do and how I do it.
Hmm.
Like, it's just exhausting, and which results in it not going back to the first part that I said. I don't think it is reaching enough people of the right kind, whatever that means.
Which thing? Let's zoom it
Anything.
in tighter. Okay, give me one example. Let's do one example.
Let's say Substack.
Okay, and here, talk to us about your Substack for our listeners who haven't seen it.
I write about, so like the Substack is called The Messy Art of Making, and
Okay.
I write about like different things about creativity. So sometimes it is like, factual, sometimes it is mindset, sometimes it is my philosophy on certain things, like what is art, what is not art. But sometimes it is just like, like one of the more popular posts is like the three people in your head, which is basically a model that I have of like you have a CEO, you have a manager, and you have an executor, and like you need to balance between the three even in your head. So like the vision, the planning, and the doing needs to be balanced. So like it's a relatively broad variety, but it is sort of like thoughts around making things. Sometimes it's instructive, sometimes it's not. Like sometimes it's more self exploratory of like something that I'm working through maybe, or sometimes it is like a recent like episode post a recent post that I made was about the idea of how should I put it? Like being middle class Indian and then wanting to be an artist. And like
Hmm.
that's very personal, but like the one before that was creative advice that is like, the only creative advice pieces, the only pieces of creative advice that you'll ever need. So that one is like more instructional.
Hmm.
But these are fairly broad, but at the same time, like this is what the Substack generally is.
Okay. So it's kind of about the journey to creativity, the journey of making, the journey of being an artist. Like with some particular, obviously based on your experience, right? So with like some
Yeah.
flavor of you.
Yeah.
Okay. And we both would agree that there's certain people who are interested in this, right? Some are people who are existing artists, some are people who are artists who are maybe like a little bit stuck, right? Like they might be reading stuff like The Artist's
But
Way,
like the
which is that book
people
that
who
we both have read.
yeah, but like the people who regularly read it or message me are not artists.
No, but I'm saying that would be, we would think that those would be the people that would be likely to be engaging with this kind of material, right? Like people who feel that struggle
I
are people
don't
who,
know that.
we just, okay, let's take a step back. So you were agreeing with me a second ago on saying that this is about making things, this
Yeah,
is about
yeah,
creativity, right? And with
yeah,
your particular flavor on those.
correct.
Okay. Who do you feel, what would the other audiences be other than kind of people who are in that journey themselves?
I don't know. A lot of the people who reply are people who are maybe thinking of being creative. There are people who just like thinking in general, or people who like how we put it in Hindi, but like basically skinning the hair, like that
So like learning for the sake of learning, kind of?
kind of, or rather
Yeah.
like exploring for the sake of exploring. Yeah.
Like it seems like kind of like trolling, but it's like good-hearted trolling, right? Like pushing you on, like, that's what I get from skinning the hair. It's like, do you need to skin the hair? Probably not, but I'm
No,
gonna
but
help
like
you.
I'm saying people who enjoy it. No, 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 people who enjoy it because my modality is very skinning the hair kind of thing. Like that's how I think. Oh, but could we go deeper and could we go deeper and could we go deeper? Which might seem senseless to a lot of people, but it doesn't to everyone.
Okay, fine. So I can add another. So we're agreeing that like artists and aspiring artists, like you just said, right? Aspiring creatives are one category. And maybe those need to be broken into two, but for now we can group them together. And then the second is there's a second emergent category of this like deep thinkers and people who enjoy kind of critically thinking about things and really kind of deepening their understanding about thinking as a whole.
Okay, fair,
Two audiences?
I guess.
And we can always add more, right? But I'm just saying for
I'm
now.
also like now that we're discussing it, I'm also not sure why I feel so like on the fence about this.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not like this is not a place where by saying that this is an audience that you're saying that these are not other audiences in the future. You're just saying that today that there is one audience I know about. And how do I, so, and then we can go the next step once we agree that there is a, but I want to first get some agreement here.
Oh, it's very interesting. My brain goes, "Oh, but how do we know why people are reading this? Like, everything that we can imagine is going to be a superficial reason. That might not be the real reason why they're doing it."
Yeah. I think that's actually interesting why I find that custom GPT I made so interesting because it really makes you look at your own work in a way that's different. Since I'm just demoing things today, I'll show that one also. But here is the custom GPT. So it's called Literary Lens. And let me
Hmm.
just grab a poem really quick. How about this one, Dandelion Child? I was just looking at that. Okay, so then you could come in here and you can, so these are just some sample things to get you started, but I'll paste this poem and it will give you some thoughts on the poem. But the other really interesting thing that it does, as you'll see in a second, is it will start to give you places where you are in a lineage or like in a heritage of different artists, but they may not be from the places that you would have thought of, right? Like I would not have thought that like Emily Dickinson's like cryptic aphorisms would be a thing that would be resonant with people who might read some of my work. And it's just interesting because it gives you an idea of like, oh, these could be communities that I could be engaging with. And like I do know Samuel Delaney's work, and I do really enjoy some of that work. So it's really interesting to me that you can see that, oh, here's some heritage, right? And I think that zooming out is sometimes really interesting to be like, oh, these, I mean, it might be wrong, right? Like maybe people who are already into Gertrude Stein would not find resonance with my work, but it gives me a sense of this could be a community I could tap into, right?
Okay.
I know. Then I sometimes get intrigued. Like it's so fun watching it. I think also the way that GPT writes was really such a satisfying aspect of the adoption or driving the adoption. Because it like appears in front of you. You're waiting for the next words. It kind of reminds you of like old school
Hmm.
chat interfaces. It's very satisfying, right? And then I love this kind of like gives you a little bit of a view of like how would you see yourself as where do you exist between all of these different artists and things.
Hmm.
Anyway, so I think that this is enough of this. So that's the interesting thing there, right? Like I don't think my work is made less by me thinking about like these ideas that like Bhanu Kapil already explored. Do I want to reference them? Do I not want to reference them? Or do I just want to be aware that this is a world that exists? And I think if I apply that similarly, it's like, yeah, do I want to just be aware that there are other people who are creatives on this journey? And maybe I will think about how I could tailor some of the message to them. Maybe I won't, but I just can be aware of like that is a potential. And I think that gives you just a way to it gives you a grounding and a little bit of a vector when you are trying to answer this question that we started off with, which is like, how do we get more resonance? How do we get more of the bell curve in front of my work?
I think I'll need to think about that one.
Well, do we want to? We could start talking about one of the audiences, or we can leave it for.
I will, no, I'm like serious. I'll actually need to think about that
Oh,
one.
okay.
Because, like, a part of why I feel like I need to think about this is that, like, it's intellectually interesting, and I don't think I've done this before. And another part is, like, I think the moment I start defining anything artistic, I start feeling like I don't want to define the audience. It resonates with whoever it resonates with. Like, I want to leave the box open. And I feel like it's one of those things where scratching it more is probably not going to be helpful. And I need to sit with it and actually let it,
Hmm.
how should I say, permeate inside me.
Hmm.
I'm sure there's something emotional there and there is something like tactical there.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's like I feel like I would come at that from a fear of missing out.
It probably is. I'm feeling some FOMO, but part of it is also, I think, a lack of courage or ownership or like
Hmm.
artistic, how should I say, owning.
Hmm.
Because I just feel like it requires courage to say it's okay for people to not like me because there are going to be some people who will like me.
Hmm.
So yeah,
It's
that's
also
like,
kind of it's saying if you say it, it's like saying I want these people to like me.
which is
Yeah.
scary. Damn, that is
Yeah,
scary.
right? That's interesting. That's why I feel like, yeah, I've had this resistance towards like figuring out which journals would really be into my work. Because I'm like, if I just submit randomly, then it's better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's also, I feel like, why some of these residency applications are Because I just go through a lot of like, oh, do I want to apply to this one? What would be good for this one? And by the time I'm writing like, the essay, I already now care.
Mm,
I'm like, as you would like to, as you can see from my essay that I would really like to be here. I'm just like no longer unemotional about it. I really do care. Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, it is just really interesting. I mean, as we were talking about last time, though, like, I don't know, I do think that there is a whole, like, you will find a community. I feel like that's something that I learned from looking at the lineage that I've like joined through my MFA and whatnot. Like, is that people found some community. It may not have been a huge community, but they did find their some community.
Hmm.
So,
But problems of courage are not problems of reasons to leap. They are problems of not leaping off the
yeah,
ledge. So,
yeah.
but yeah, I feel like, if I just let it sit for a while, something should open up.
Okay.
But okay, thanks.
Bye.
We'll see. But yes, thanks.
Bye. No, it's bye.